And after a bit of time to get my thoughts together on Vampyr, and me downloading Audacity, I've not used this since I did my Space Marine playthroughs over a decade, was it a decade ago? Something like that. But, yeah, this is slightly new to me, but here we go once more with Audacity. Vampyr, I like the atmosphere of the game. Like, it did have this nice oppressive feel to it. The music added to it. Some of the text, or the dialogue in the cutscenes could be a little purple prosy, but I think overall it was fine. Like, the game advertised its choices and its consequences, and yeah, I felt that was rather well done. Like, you had choices to, how you dealt with the pillars of the community, and they felt immediately. Like, I looked up some of the videos on how things could go depending on your choices. If you let the rich guy get turned into a vampire, everybody in the district gets sick because it basically falls apart. But if you let him die, it really isn't that bad because he was running it more or less to the ground anyway. Sean, you're supposed to essentially turn him into a vampire and things, or the different type of vampire, then things become much better in the district. And yeah, I wish I'd known that. I was kind of fooled a little bit by the Skarl's pleas of coexistence and peace, and it didn't really work out. And for a while, I actually thought that was rather bad of the game to espouse this message of peace instead of. And in the end, it's like, well, you should just massacre all of them. It's like, and then I was reading someone else's thoughts on the matter, and they pointed out, well, there's the blood of hatred that he's been infected with. Like, oh yeah. It was going to go bad, but you probably wouldn't know that the first time, so the game kind of baits you into it. And it could have been a bit more emphasized, because you're probably going to take the wrong message away if you don't sit there and think about it a lot like I did. But there are times you actually feel like a doctor in this. Like, here, someone's sick, go cure them. I could have done a bit more with it, especially in the Pembroke, because like you're mostly just a gopher for them. Lady Ashbury needs, someone to deal with a blackmailer, go deal with that. You really don't do anything in the Pembroke outside of, like, deal with the named characters. One of the doctors does call you out on that, and I do like that, but I wish there'd been a bit more doctoring, but as is, it's kind of fine, because after a while, certain stuff like that just becomes, just a liability, and it's not really fun to deal with. The choices, like, I made the big mistake with Sean, kind of regret it, but hey, if I wanted to play the game again, it'd be a very different playthrough. Then, the district fell apart, 4 people I basically had to kill, and I wasn't able to pick off the people that I wanted to in that district. That probably would have been bad, because I think I would have gotten the bad ending at that point in time. I looked up the endings. I'm not sure why the good ending gets classified as that, because they basically just kind of leave the area and go travel the world. Like, I don't think that's a good idea, knowing that, Lady Ashbury is still, has this disease, essentially, that she could potentially pass on to other people. It's like, I think the good ending works better for that he's going to stick around and cure her. The bad ending is she just kills herself, because she can't trust herself, and, Jonathan has obviously been munching people left and right, so she doesn't think she can avoid that. And the bad ending is Jonathan just goes full serial killer, and yeah, she just regrets ever caring about him. And repeatability is obviously like a big thing of the game. You could go back and make different choices. Different people could live or die by your decisions. I probably will do it eventually, but I'm probably going to put the game away for a little bit because I've played it quite a bit. Overall, I like the game. It has some good role-playing choices. There's some combat things I have and I complain quite a bit about, but the actual role-playing aspects are quite well done. You could have multiple builds depending on, how you're going to go about things. I only really figured out towards the end of the game how that would work. Because, you could have, a really spam-casty build with, the knives or the other blood-drawing weapons. Whereas, if you're going for a stun, and feed build, you'd obviously want different things. You wouldn't be eating people as much, so you'd want, more value out of the times that you do bite people. But, you wouldn't be getting as much, so obviously you'd be going for different stats in that, so that's something that, you could just play this game completely differently. Even in terms of, you're not going to eat anyone, but your stats are going to look very different depending on what weapons you want. And to go on to the negatives, thing I complained about in basically every set, no mini-map. There's times I had to pull the map up, look around, okay, I think I'm going this way, take a couple of steps, pull up the mini-map again to make sure I'm going there, and then just run that way, and have to constantly check it a few times throughout the playthrough, because I just wasn't sure where I was going. Yeah, you can stick down markers, but they're still kind of awkward to deal with, and the map itself doesn't lend itself to like zooming in or doing much with it. Doesn't like that. The gameplay itself, some of the complex, the combat is just fiddly. There's multiple times where you could see me like take a swing at someone, it doesn't count. Someone from behind me hits me, or like I parry something, it doesn't count, or I parry something and it did count when it shouldn't have. There's some fiddly things about that. It wanted to be a Dark Souls-like game, and it just didn't quite have that tuning to it. If you're under leveled, it does limit what you can do quite badly. Because for a long time, I just had to have like the big, stat stick. Whatever did the most damage, that was what I was using, and that was the build I was locked into. Towards the end of the game, when I started munching more people, then I could actually like branch out and do different things because I had the stats to back the XP to buy those stats or abilities. It is, leading into that, if you're not playing a serial killer, it's difficult to keep up in levels. Because, like, there's some designated victims the game has. A lot of them are locked at, Mesmerize level 5, which is basically the end of the game. For the mid part of the game, you're incentivized to, finish their quest, then eat them. But a lot of times you can't finish that quest until much later on, or it's not convenient to do so. So, the designated victims in itself is kind of a problem because then you're not really making a hard choice. Like Clay Cox is an awful human being. Getting rid of him is a net positive for the area. The priest, Whitaker, obviously a psychopath. Bad person, sets people on fire. Getting rid of him is just an easy decision. Then you have the leaders of the Wet Boot Boys. They're obviously bad people. Getting rid of them will only help the situation. Though possibly it could make things worse because, the docks are such a bad place. If they're providing some form of stability, at least that's there. But then you have Bates, the guy I let die in Whitechapel. Looking up on the wiki, he's also like a tremendous piece of work, and getting rid of him is as a no-brainer as well. Then you have like most of the people in the West End, they're not connected to any kind of social circle, so there's not really much consequence in the way of killing one because they're frequently not tied together. The West End obviously suffered the most from the game is just about completed. We need to finish this development up and then just rush it out the door. You don't spend much time there. You don't need to spend much time there. It's hard to justify spending much time there because the game is mostly over at that point in time. There's some options, like in the abilities, you have a stealth option, noting that certain enemies can detect you anyway. Well, there's not much need for stealth. Because in times I didn't want to engage in combat, I could just run by people until they tethered. Sometimes you can take higher routes to get around people, and it looks like stealth was going to be a much bigger part of the game. It was not going to be as combat heavy, and then somewhere it changed. Because if you're tagged with an enemy, you can't get through a door until they untag you from being in combat, and that's really frustrating. You just want to run through and. Stealth doesn't help towards the end of the game because the enemies that can detect you, the preachers and some of the Skarls, can just note you at a distance. So it's hard to justify stealth when it just seems to be a dead-end street. Some of the skills really, really needed a bit more information on them, especially like the range. The shadow skill I used quite heavily. It did not have a range on like how big a range it was, and I had to just kind of guess. Sometimes, like, I'd be looking at an enemy and it would just cast at my feet because I didn't target them quickly enough. But, like, even though I clearly just wanted to hit that particular enemy and just, yeah. Also, when you invest in that second tier of skills, you can't go back. So if you find out you didn't want that one or it does something you didn't want it to do, like the one I picked frequently didn't work out. It did a limited amount of damage. Melee enemies would immediately start running towards you. Ranged enemies would sit in it. And it'd mostly refund the cost if it was used against ranged enemies, but against melee enemies was basically worthless because they would just run out of it almost immediately, doing no damage. Some of the other skills probably were more useful for melees, but I never really used them much. But again, that kind of is a positive. I could go back and do another replay and see how these skills work, and it might turn out that I liked them a lot better. But for stationary enemies, the shadow skill worked quite well. Jumping back onto our designated victims, Mary should have stuck around longer, and I know I mentioned it in the actual game, that she'd work very well as a foil for Jonathan. Like, no matter what route he's taking, she can just be the opposite. If you're going in here as serial killer extreme, she can be the good sister. If you're trying to play as, a good person, she can be someone who's struggling not to eat everyone in sight. And it would have worked better as that kind of play to it. The story itself is kind of odd in places. Like, Aslan itself does not go anywhere. It does not need to be there. It doesn't add anything meaningful to the story. You kind of wander around for this long period of time trying to discover what's behind the plague, and then Edward just tells you. It's not due to your investigation that you figure out what's going on. You just get told it. And it doesn't feel satisfying that, because you're looking at the mystery of this plague, and then you just get told it. And I wish that had been dealt with in somewhat different fashion, like Jonathan somehow gotten a hold of Lady Ashbury's blood, tested it, and it found this is the same stuff there's some similarities to the plague going around, and just kind of wondering, okay, did she eat someone? No, she didn't. And you start questioning people, and eventually it comes up that, Swansea was doing some kind of experimentation, and Jonathan puts two and two together and confronts him on the matter. And the story in general kind of wanders around from roughly Mary to about the lady in the theater, Doris something or other, Doris Fletcher. It just kind of wanders around, and then it gets to the end of the game and just goes full into it. Because before then, there's a lot of digressions. Aslan is this weird little side plot that doesn't amount to anything. If you betray them, you have to go into a fight to get William Marshall's blood, and if not, I imagine he just gives it to you right out. But you go in there and confront him, and he just hands it over after a short sentence or two. And yeah, it feels like they had something planned there, but it was just a much longer story, much bigger story, and they just did not have the ability to put it out, and they cut it down kind of awkwardly. It should have been about the plague straight through, and just been a much smaller focused story where you had a lot more side branching out that could affect the main story, and that would probably have worked out better. I do hope they come out to redoing or revisiting this particular setting with Vampyr 2, but this got released in 2018, I believe, and is currently 2024, and I don't think they're coming back. I think this is done. It did sell quite well in Europe and modestly well in the US, but they may decide it's not worth their time. So overall, like the game, still some big flaws with it. The story meandered a bit until it just kind of ran to the end. But you do have some good choices on the way there, and some of it I probably made a bit too late, which goes back to, you have your designated victims, most of them are at Mesmerize 5. You're probably not going to stick around in order to see the consequences of your actions, because I found Joe and his social standing and take a hit because everybody thought he killed Lewis. Sorry about that, Joe. But, it is something to see their reactions to it, but I just didn't really want to sit around and go harass everyone about their feelings about certain people when the game was pretty much done and there wasn't really much point in doing it. The designated victims who don't have social circles are not going to have much in the way of a meaningful interaction around them. So had they cut down the number of characters and tied everyone a bit closer together, that likely would have gone away. In a future game, honestly, I'd like to see them do away with the no eating people is possible with the best ending. That if I would go with, if you don't kill anyone, everything falls apart, because some people in there will just end other people if you don't do anything about it. If you let Clay Cox live, he'll start killing off random people because he's a thug, and that's what he does until he's arrested or something. And you could lose 2 or 3 people if you don't deal with him. Stuff of that nature. I would like them to come back to it, if not this particular setting, but something similar. But time will tell. So I hope everyone's enjoyed this little review. I did enjoy the game. I would recommend buying it, but just be aware of its flaws. That some of the gameplay might be kind of on the awkward side, and if you're going for a no kills run, it's certainly a valid playthrough, but you're probably cutting out most of the game, unfortunately, with no skills being upgraded. So, but if you're on a serial killer, it also feels kind of bad because you're just being a mass murdering lunatic at this point, not any better than what you're supposedly fighting. So I hope everyone's enjoyed my little review. I will probably have out some videos about Rogue Trader in the next couple of days, and hopefully everyone will like them. I've heard good things about the game. I've heard it's also very buggy, so I played a little bit of it, not very much, but I know some things are coming up just off of Osmosis. But yeah, hopefully everyone will enjoy that one as much as they had the other one. So until next time, bye.